Good morning, everybody. My name is Kieran from the IICS, and I'm presenting with my colleague Ian Hickey on clerical child sex abuse and the Catholic Church, research findings from a listening exercise in the Republic of Ireland. And the aim of the research project was simply to listen to people and to hear what they were saying when they talked about the impact of clerical child sex abuse on their understanding of Catholicism in the Republic of Ireland. And when we were designing it, we designed voluntary, anonymous, online, in-depth, one-to-one semi-structured interviews. And we felt this was best given the confidential and the difficult and complex nature of clerical child sex abuse. And we carried it out online because of COVID. And we interviewed 12 adults in rural and urban areas in Ireland, and their contact details were in the public domain. So I suppose it's important to say that it was difficult to recruit people to take part in this. We did that through email invitation. The research schedule was that we started in September 2020 with ethical clearance, which was obviously deeply important to this area, and designed the schedule of questions. And then we carried out the interviews from November to February. And from March to June, we reviewed the data, we wrote it up, and we're presenting it today to you. So the ethics were really important in carrying out this research. All research has a really key ethical dimension, but when you're dealing with clerical child sex abuse and eliciting people's responses to it, there are huge ethical issues, issues of power, issues of confidentiality, issues of people who may have been impacted directly themselves by this. And Hayes and Singh note that in-depth semi-structured interviews on any topic are an immersion in intense and difficult experiences, and thus unforeseen emotional experiences can arise. So we were acutely aware of this. And Smith notes that the word research can be one of the dirtiest words in the vocabulary. So we went about this research obviously deeply conscious of the ethical issues. It was voluntary research, anonymous participation in the research. People were free to withdraw at any time. Obviously, we had informed consent. There were no inducements to participate. And it was carried out, by us, very conscious of that. So in 1993, Sheila Drudy and Kathleen Lynch commented in their fabulous book, Schools and Society in Ireland, on the status of religious communities. And in 1993, they said, the status is high in Irish society. And I bolded this here. By virtue of their high moral status, the churches bring an aura of legitimacy to bear on the education system, immunizing it from attack, since the church's legitimating armory as the moral arbiters in society is transferred to the educational scene. And this forestalls criticism. So you can see in 1993, the really high esteem that the churches were kept in general. And then I want to bring us up to 2020-21, a survey among 400 third level students, postgraduate students in Ireland, asked them, of those of you who have left religious organisations, what were the factors involved in your leaving the churches? And one of the factors was sexual abuse of children by religious. And in this particular survey, 91% of participants said it was somewhat or very important. So there's been a huge revolution, a huge turn, I suppose, around in the status of the church in the intervening time between 1993 and 2021. So I just want you to look at some of the key events and reports that have been involved in clerical child sex abuse in Ireland. These are not all of them, but just familiarise yourself. You may very well be familiar with them. 2009, the reports started to come out, the Ryan report and the Murphy report, and the details of clerical child sex abuse were in the public domain really from 1995 onwards.
So thanks very much for that, Trish. I suppose Trish just kind of gave the introduction into the research and what we did in the ethical clearances and the background. I suppose from here on in, I'm just going to discuss our findings, discuss the responses that we got to those semi-structured questions that we asked. One of those questions was, has clerical child sex abuse in Ireland impacted how you see the church? Of the 12 people who were asked this question, of the 12 interviewees, 11 responded and said that they agree with it, that it has impacted how they see the church. And you can see some of these responses on the left-hand side, such as the first one, which says, yes, the church had too much power and the state colluded. However, I can also see great hope for the church. Others say that they no longer consider themselves Catholic or they no longer engage with the church. Whereas on the right-hand side, the person who said no, the one person, they say that my own views on the church has not changed. I am able to separate the wider issues from the individual. Everybody needs faith. Everybody has their own sense of faith that is personal to them. And a lot of people, I suppose, in the interviews that we carried out, cited the hierarchy as opposed to maybe the local priest as, I suppose, the as a problem for them or as an issue from their own perspectives. How has the Catholic Church responded to clerical abuse in Ireland? 100% of those asked, of the 12, said that it responded negatively, badly, poorly. Nobody said that it responded well. A sample or an example of a response would be here from participant 1. They say that the church was dragged kicking and screaming. They mentioned denial. Abusers moved from parish to parish, that it was shameful. Participant 5 says that it was covered up. The church has no decency. And at the bottom there, you can see effing awfully. It's an embarrassment as a sort of response to this question. Another question that we asked was, do members of the Catholic Church see child protection as a very important issue? I suppose the breakdown of this is really 33% each. 4 people said yes, that it is an important issue. 4 said it has to be seen to be important, that the church has to keep up appearances to be important as well, that it has to be important. And 4 people said no. Up in the the left-hand corner, you'll see the response of those who said yes, that the church do see it as an important issue. They say that there's more awareness, there's better policies, there's better child protection, and it's very rigorous and adhered to, says participant 6. Whereas down at the bottom, those who say that it has to be seen to be important. If the abuses hadn't been uncovered, would the church actually care about child protection at the moment? They mentioned, participant 7 then mentions guarded vetting, and that this has to be done out of necessity. The person has a quote that people who said no, that the church don't care about, that it isn't an important issue for them, said that they're, quote unquote, and I'm quoting here, doing damage control. And another quote here would be, if they, the Catholic Church, did see child protection as an important issue, they would have dealt with everything that has happened in the past instead of ignoring it. Another question that we asked in our research was, do you think that clerical child sex abuse in Ireland has changed the way people view child protection today? Of those that were asked this question, 100% said yes. Participant 3, an example would be, yes, people have learned from the past and they have more support for victims nowadays. The church had a lot of power and that wasn't right. They had total control. People are more aware, guarded vetting. And participant 8 says that the horror of clerical sex abuse presented urgency. This response of those asked, it was asked to 7 because of the semi-structured nature of the interviews. This question arose for 7 of the interviewees. Of those 7, 100% said that it's still very, the clerical child sexual abuse for them is still very much an issue of the present moment. It's not confined to the past, and it's something that informs how they think about the church at the moment. The question or the statement that we asked them to respond to was, clerical child sex abuse is a shameful legacy from the past, but it no longer conditions how people view Catholic clergy or members of religious orders in Ireland today. An example maybe will be, we'll say participant 5, the second one down, says that it's a shameful legacy that will haunt the church forever. The church was, quote unquote, basically a paedophile ring because it covered up wrongdoings. And there's strong language here and a strong response to some of the questions that we got. Participant 6 said it won't go away until it's addressed properly. Participant 10, shameful legacy and an embarrassment. and they don't see themselves as Catholic anymore because of this. So the impact then on the general public and and how they respond. I think you can see from yourself here that the general consensus is that the church seems to be detached and the priest seems to be detached. Participant forward that priests are self-serving, egotistical, narcissistic. They have too much power. And if we even skip down just to the last person, participant 11, I believe that at the level of the local priest, there is a respect, but at a hierarchical level, the same respect isn't there because of how they handled allegations. So we get two sort of views there, I suppose, in some respects. Of this question then, has clerical child sex abuse made a difference on how you view Catholic or charitable cultural organisations? Of the 12, 5 responded saying yes, 4 said that no, and it didn't come up in 3 of our interviews. Of those that said yes, you can see on the left-hand side of your screen there, participant 1 says Peter McVerry and Sister Stan do great work, but what they say is what any logical person in the 21st century should be saying. And I suppose a more a different approach such is in participant 10 here underneath, and they say they'd like to see a separation of church and state, and they go on to say that the likes of St. Vincent de Paul and Trócaire, and they say that they are modern day missions, and when they bring charity, they're also spreading their faith, so I can't support them. An example of people who said no, that say that they can disassociate their work from charities from the church. And an interesting one here, I think, is participant 3, and they say people who work in charities do good work, and not everybody in the church acted badly. Priests aren't involved in running them, so I don't mind supporting charities. And I think that's an interesting take and an interesting aspect that came up in our research. And just the final slide here is to consider, can anything be learned from reflecting on the church's past mistakes? Any signs of hope and renewal? Of the 12 that were asked, 2 said that there would be hope for renewal, there can be hope for renewal. 9 people said no, there's no hope for renewal, and 1 person said maybe. On the left-hand side, participant 7 was one of those who said yes, and they said there is a future because people will remain Catholic in the future. Personally, as an educator, I could never go back to working in Catholic ethos school. RE is now more like a history subject and is more fun for students as opposed to pushing an agenda, they say. An example of the person who said no, that said people have turned towards meditation and mindfulness nowadays, and they said it's new forms of prayer that are not associated with the Catholic Church or Catholic teaching. Until they deal with the past, there can be no renewal. And there's just more example there on the left-hand side of your screen, but I think an important part is that on the right-hand screen, on the right-hand side is the person who said maybe, and they said the proof is in the pudding. It's a bit early. It's a bit like renewal after the Second World War, you know. You have to show humility. You have to show that you're learning from it. You have to stand back and take the flak, and renewal is something that will happen. The COVID thing, funnily enough, shows us the value of public spirituality, the value of public religion. It's very important to have something like that. But the problem is once that gets into positions of power, it becomes the arbiter. It becomes power in itself. It's a sort of self-serving prophecy. So that's just some of the, I suppose, the responses to the questions, some of the questions that we asked. And I'll hand you over for the final minute of our presentation over to Trish to talk about the findings that we got. You're muted there, Trish.
Sorry. This was a small listening exercise, and we don't want to make any universal inferences from it. It's not representative of the church in Ireland. It's just a moment in time in a particular place where we listened to voices. And what were these voices saying? There are very strong feelings of anger, outrage, mistrust, upset, betrayal. They were universal, all 12 voices. The church hierarchy came in for an awful lot of criticism, and how they dealt with allegations of abuse is a major issue. And funnily enough, when we were talking to people, they were saying, listen, I have friends who are priests, I know priests, they're lovely people locally in my community, but there seemed to be just a feeling of anger at the power wielded by the hierarchy and the clergy in Ireland in the past and perhaps in the present. The whole issue of clerical child sex abuse is not a historic issue. It's a contemporary, serious issue that impacts on people nowadays and on how they view the church. Our 12 participants see it as a persistent issue with devastating consequences for the survivors of abuse, for their families, for society as a whole. And it was a cause for many people to leave the church. So there is unanimity about how appalling it was, the impact that it's had, and there was a condemnation of the church's handling of it. So we'd like to thank you for bearing with us for this paper.